the actual cheat code is understanding the culture and understanding the people. And the closer that you are to the people, the more that you're going to be able to understand, and the faster you're going to be able to get to target, the faster you're going to be able to produce your own targets. We are juiced into the population. So after my second trip, I wanted to go to one of our human intelligence courses so I could be qualified to do that. And that kind of set the trajectory really for the rest of my career in the military.
Interesting. Did you ever get into the ASOT stuff?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I went to.
That's what that is?
Yeah, that's what I went to. And then much later on, I went to the farm.
So, I mean, that's a long pipeline.
It's a long course, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
I can try. Yeah. I mean, it's a school that teaches, you how to basically run human sources. There's a lot of like lines there where what the CIA is authorized to do versus what, soldiers are allowed to do. But, without getting into too many details, I mean, you have to learn basic, agent handling skills. You have to learn how to debrief people, how to, spot whether or not they're lying to you to the best of your ability. But then
how
also,
would you do that? What are some of those tactics?
What's that?
What are some of those things you learned about?
Yeah, I mean, some people get really into the neuro-linguistic programming, like how people sit and like, do they look up and left, right and left? Do they rub their, with a whole different culture? I think that probably applies a lot to police officers in America where you're dealing with your own culture. Trying to apply a lot of that to a foreign culture, I think is very challenging unless you're deeply steeped in that culture. So for me, it was always like, check the checkables. If somebody's coming to you and they're like saying, hey, I am part of Jaish al-Mahdi, I'm part of Al-Qaeda. I'm like, okay, can you prove to me, like, how are you a member of that organization? Just very basic, like, is this person who they say they are? Because if they can't positively identify themselves to you, or they can't really prove what they have access to, whatever information they're going to tell you, it's either completely made up or it has an agenda of its own. So I think that's one of I think journalists have to do this as well. It's like, what are you have all these things you want to tell me, but you need to explain to me how you actually have access to it. So I think that's probably the most fundamental. There's a bunch of other stuff that we can do to check in on people. But I think that's probably at the very basic level. What we look for when we're meeting a new potential asset.
I mean, I find that to be an interesting route for you because you're so into.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're so into the kinetic.
Yeah.
In your face action of being a SF guy, and then you take this which is almost it's under the radar, kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with people.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, I was surprised too. But when I was over there, number one, just being impatient, I was, especially when we were doing unilateral direct action, we'd get intelligence from like our intelligence cell. And I was always like, where does this mysterious intelligence come from? Like we get it in the form of like, we think this bad guy's in this house and this bad guy's important because of X, Y, and Z. And I always had it in my head. I'm like, how do we know that? Like, is this something that's really, really interesting and like sophisticated, But then, you hit enough dry holes, you're like, I don't think this is something that's very sophisticated. I think sometimes they're doing the best they can. But then it was really once we started working with the Iraqis, I was like, okay, the actual cheat code is understanding the culture and understanding the people. And the closer that you are to the people, the more that you're going to be able to understand. And the faster you're going to be able to get to target, the faster you're going to be able to produce your own targets. And that's one of the unique things about Special Forces, about a Special Forces ODA, is that organically we can do our own human intelligence, and then we can analyze our own intelligence, and then we can train up a force, or we can prosecute the target ourselves. So we can basically do cradle to grave targeting. And that was what I noticed was different from us. Once we branched out and we started doing, especially the commando mission, I was like, okay, I can see our unique role here, because you had everybody else. You had the Rangers, the SEALs, you had the Marine Corps Det 1 guys, the MARSOC guy, the initial MARSOC guys. Everybody was kind of competing for the same DA kinetic mission. They were competing for assets. They were competing for the targets, And so it was like, now I see what our niche is here. We can do that, sure. But our niche is being down here with the local population, mapping out the human terrain, but then also at the same time being able to take our indigenous forces out there and prosecute the target at the same time. So I really liked that autonomy, and it put me much more in the driver's seat, being a part of the intel side, because it was like, oh, now I'm driving operations because I'm the guy collecting the intelligence.
It's totally. I mean, it's you're self-sufficient.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
So was there any regret into kind of taking that route versus staying in a more?
Not really, man. I really liked it because especially as the wars went on, it just seemed like we were screwing up the U.S. government, like we were screwing up the intel piece. Like we were pretty good at hunting. Like once we got the bad guys in our crosshairs, like they were going to get dead or they were going to get a set of flex cuffs. Like that was just it. But could we find them? That was a big thing. Also on my 2004 trip, that's when Zarqawi was doing a lot of the kidnapping and putting the beheading videos up. Mm-hmm. We had really good intel from one of our sources who basically was like, I know who the guy standing by Zarqawi is, and we know where he is, but he's in this area where like you guys really can't get into. Because we had we had been training up a low visibility snatch team with our Iraqis, we were able to go get in garb and blend in and snatch this guy who was part of this kidnapping cell out of his apartment. Probably the coolest mission I've ever been on in my life. But basically, the big army wouldn't go into the area because it was in Abu Ghraib, just on the other side of where the prison is. They wouldn't go in there because they were just like, every time we go in there, we get stitched up by IEDs. Like, we're not going to do it. We had moved so fast that basically we were just to the outskirts of the city by the time we even like called it back in, because this is before people had constant connectivity in the team houses. So by the time we called in that we were going out there back to our headquarters, they were like, well, this pertains to hostage rescues, so we think that like one of the JSOC units should do it. And basically like my team leadership was like, yeah, we're less than a mile away. We're just going to go ahead and do this. Like, we'll let you know when it's done. And I was like, wow, because we're juiced into the human terrain, because we're running our own intel, we're actually beating the guys who in theory are supposed to be handling this, the guys who are supposed to be one rung up from us. We're actually beating them to target, and that didn't happen every time. Obviously they were doing great things, but that was a big eye opener for me, especially coming out of Ranger Battalion. I was like, because we're down here, because we're dealing with the populace, we're running our own intel, we're beating people to target, and we're coming up with unconventional solutions. We're not getting on a helicopter every time and waiting for us to have a cordon force. We're sneaking into these places in whatever vehicles we can acquire off target. We were doing a lot of stuff. We were jumping out of bread trucks as well, broad daylight, just places where the big army wouldn't go. And even a lot of the other units couldn't get into, but that's because we were living downtown amongst the populace.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.